we have youth that want to join sector, but either don't have the opportunity or are unable to. And we have the skills gap. We have the roles that theoretically we need to fill. So it should be a relatively straightforward job, one would think, to join the dots between those and find a route through. But it needs to be one that is construction-centric rather than a more all-encompassing approach to youth unemployment or to youth apprenticeships.
Focusing on more project-based than your stable workplace environment and industries. And my thoughts go to, okay, so how would that be facilitated? And maybe there's some way around this by not focusing on employing apprentices for an individual organization. It's almost like a shared apprenticeship, like you would in a larger organization where you are seconded onto various different disciplines to learn a trade and find out what you like.
Peter Sumpton, we're very much on brand and on brief this week with some genuinely positive stories across the board. No scraping the barrel, no digging around. There's some good stuff out there. How's your week been, mate?
Yeah, it's been good, to be fair. Spring is kind of coming. Frost yesterday. I don't know why we always start with. I always revert to weather. Very, very English thing to do. No, I'm gonna skip that. It's been good. There is a lot of positivity around. Although in some news stories they kind of try and make it a little more negative than it needs to be, but with a positive spin of which we need in the industry. But yeah, all in all, truth be told, 3 headlines, 3 stories that are very positive and looking towards the future in a real and the industry in a real positive way. How's your week been?
It's been good. I mean, I will say we need to look at the data on podcast listenership, because I wonder if people tune in just for your weather updates and then there's a start drop-off rate after that. But yeah, all good. There's no complaints. It's some scary stuff happening in the world, but you can only control what you can control. And I think, certainly in our neck of the woods, we'll see. The longer this stuff goes on, maybe I'll change my tune a little bit. But there's plenty of stuff out there where I think it's either genuine solid optimism, or after the number of shocks that we've had in the last couple of years, people are just thinking, do you know what, sleeves up, get on with it. Again, control the controllables and let's push on. So yeah, whichever side of that particular divide we're falling on, I'm not sure, but we'll take it and we'll keep going. So yeah, all good. On that, worth us diving into to the first item this week.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. From building.co.uk, we start, and we seem to have a bit of a trend on the podcast in terms of certain sectors, and at the moment it's very much architect focused. Of which I think you listen, you watch, you read, and from a built environment perspective, architects seem to be that not outsider, but very much it's all blocks and building and tier 1 and contractors and on site, and then this pocket of architectural brilliance is sat there. But this story is head on into architects who still remain optimistic despite this Middle East conflict, of which we've spoken about before, and the closing of oil supplies. And this optimism comes from a RIBA survey. So what are your thoughts about this one?
Well, I was just going to say on that, I always think it's interesting because we've covered, in fact, I think we've covered the Future Trends survey, which is a monthly thing. I think we've done previous editions on the podcast before. I always think it's interesting if you follow kind of the golden thread, or if you follow the RIBA plan of works appropriately enough. I think it's interesting to look at the sentiment that the architects, the consultants, those that are at the very, very early stages of a project. What I'm seeing at the minute, as an aside before we get into this, is that and it stands to reason, manufacturers are having a tough time of it at the minute with cost fluctuations. I think the price of oil being keenly felt there, and also the impact of reduction in starts in some parts of the construction sector last year mean that work just hasn't hit those guys yet. So data coming out of that part of the supply chain isn't phenomenal. Same with merchants. They had a really tough year last year, and that, again, one of the things that I've seen is that sales volumes are down, but sales values are up just because of the price of materials being passed on to customers, as you're seeing on the high street and so on. So I think it's sometimes helpful to look at the start of the supply chain, as it were. If they're seeing positive things, then hopefully that eventually, as products start to get through approval into build and then on from there, yeah, that is better news for everyone. So yeah, I think it's worth keeping an eye on things like the RIBA Future Trends report.
Mm.
Now, it's worth saying confidence has softened a little bit month on month. Obviously, I'm sorry, jumping around slightly. The good thing with this is that with it being monthly, you're starting to see some of the impacts of things like what are happening in Iran at the minute, starting to come through there. There are other surveys that we've looked at where I think you and I have caveated that these numbers look great, but worth highlighting that these people were probably surveyed before this activity started. So this is very hot off the press in that respect. So confidence has softened. There was the way it works is similar to the S&P purchase managers index, where you kind of have a flat zero, and then any positive number is positive, and then negative indicates a contraction. So the confidence indices was +1 for new work this month. So people are expecting a growth in new work. That's come down slightly from +5 the previous month, but even so, for that softening of confidence, that there's still the expectation that the workloads will grow for architectural practices on the horizon. So again, there's something of a canary down the mine that if they are seeing workload growth or forecasting workload growth, that's then good news for the rest of the supply chain once those things hit approval and hit maturity. One of the things to note with that is that larger practices within the RIBA membership base, very, very confident. They're scoring at +39 at the minute in terms of their sort of general feeling for market. So as tends to happen, just as a sort of feat of economics, that the money tends to go with, it tends to make its way to the safe spaces, and people are generally thinking that the big practices are where the safe money is at the minute. Some contraction on the SME side of things, and I guess similar in trends to surveys that you and I have looked at elsewhere, Pete. That there is a bit of a sector by sector, vertical by vertical approach to this. That it will surprise you absolutely none that contractions in residential forecasts that doesn't look great, particularly private resi side of things, but particularly strong in public sector investment and commercial, two markets that look like a lot of starts for architects and a lot of commissions there. So yeah, as I say, I think the interesting thing for me is more where these people sit within the supply chain and what the knock-on effects are of their role for others going forward. So I'm clinging on to some optimism there. I think if they're seeing growth, then that's good news for the rest of us further down the supply chain. Anything else in there that I've missed, or anything that you noticed that's worth flagging?
I think like you were saying there, they're at the front facing part of or the start of this supply chain, if you like, and looking at buildings and the design before they're even on site and the project really gets going. The thing that stuck out to me is, again, going back to what you were saying about what we've covered in the past, and where injections of public or private um, injections of public or private monies coming into the industry and projects are taking off. We always mention these data centers and commercial elements, and it's good that this is showing there's a positivity around that. I'd expect the private housing community sectors to show that decline. It seems that is the one that's impacted by large scale macro economical factors going on around the world anyway. And I think that's a good barometer of the instant. But like you said, this is more positivity about the future and what's going on there. The main positive to take away from this is, even though all the headlines about them are about the Middle East, all the headlines are about the cutoff of oil and where oil is actually used, and most people don't realize how widespread oil is required for various industries. Um, Yet we're still seeing this positive upward trend, even though it's tapered down a little bit, as you'd expect. So it's nothing but positive. I would see it. You can't have every rose in the garden blossoming, if you like, but there are loads of roses in this garden. I'm back to weather now, aren't I? This is terrible. We need to move on. But I mean, Adrian Dobson, RIBA's executive director, summarizes it perfectly, really, saying the results show a resilient profession, despite a softening outlook, likely influenced by the economic impact of the conflict. conflict in the Middle East. That's pretty much what we're saying. But we're always going to have these impacts. There's always going to be that fly in the ointment, like at any point. Everything's not going to be fantastic the whole time. And the fact that we are showing this resilience as an industry, even though it is this huge thing that is impacting and will trickle down, and prices will increase, and things will cost more. It's a real positive thing to see.
Yeah, no, for certain. The one, not to be too much of a sort of downer on this, but one thing to keep an eye on is I mentioned it before, the S&P UK Purchase Managers Index, particularly for construction. Again, we will have mentioned it several times on this. It's one of the things that I keep my eye on. That's had a massive drop. That's had its biggest contraction in 6 years. But again, that will be people further down supply chain. So anyone that's feeling it at the minute, and again, it will particularly be the merchant end of things, the manufacturer end of things, house builders, like you say, particularly for new demand. If that started to peter out, then yeah, hopefully things like RIBA Future Trends and others that are at that particular end of the supply chain, hopefully that gives you some confidence that, yeah, please God, this situation is resolved sooner rather than later. And then there is already that demanding market and those plans in place to really accelerate from there. So, yeah, I think, let's go on to the positives from the RIBA report, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to more positivity, it's our trusted friend, the BSR. They seem to be an exemplar in how to do things, or at least how to try and tackle things, and they are at it again
Do you know
in
what's interesting?
construction news.
Sorry, Matt, I was just going to say what's interesting there is that if you'd have said one of the first podcasts that we did together in this format was Andy Rowe, the chair of the BSR, getting absolutely chewed out by the House of Lords Select Committee. If you'd have said, at that point that we'd be holding him up as our mate and sort of the poster child for improvements in the sector within 6 months, I never ever would have believed you. But here we are again.
Yeah, here we are. Here we are. So this new story is in Construction News. BSR aims to beat 12-week decision time on cladding applications, but there's a bit more to this story than just that. Ryan, take it away. Talk us through this and all the positivity that the BSR are creating, or at least trying to create, and have done so
Well,
far.
yeah, well, as a bit of a callback for anyone that listened to previous episodes where we were looking at Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 and some of the work that the BSR had done to improve things there, for all the pats on the back around that, remediation work on cladding was a fly in the ointment a little bit, that for all these positives, this is still where we're dragging our heels a little bit. But it was referenced and it was said at the time, again, to give Andy Rowe and team credit, we recognize that this is still the problem and therefore we're not resting on our laurels. We're going to continue to focus on this, and right to do so, because the median sort of the time for improvements 36 weeks at the minute, which is again, these are people that are living in these properties or can't live in these properties, whatever the case may be. It's lives being affected, and it's a lot of upset and a lot of it needs remedying very quickly. Now, the target is 8 weeks. And again, credit to the BSR. They've been very honest in this latest announcement to say, not practical to go from 36 to 8. We can't, we're not going to make those promises and can't make improvements to that scale. But their aim is to get it to 12, which would be in line with Gateway 2 improvements previously. And it looks like when you get into the tactics that they're looking at employing, it looks a bit copy and paste, and I do not mean that as a criticism. I think that's a positive. If there's lessons learned from the experience of Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 improvements that could, within reason, be ported across to this, then I don't see why you wouldn't. But one of the big things that stands out for me is that a lot of this feels very similar to the innovation units that were created as part of the Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 approvals process, that things will be looked at on their merit by teams of people that are multidisciplinary, skilled, and therefore can take a proper view of these things, rather than with respect to perhaps other parts of the sector, assessors that haven't ever worked in market and therefore are just looking at things on the basis of effectively a checklist. To have people taking a common sense view of these things and taking a technical view of these things, and in some cases we're going to be at a point where works can continue within reason while other parts of the scheme are under review. So we're not it's not an all or nothing, everything on hold and then everything starts at once, which again makes absolute sense to me. But yeah, several other bits in there. But I don't know if you wanted to jump in, Pete, on anything that particularly stood out to you.
Yeah, and stood here as a marketer, it's dead easy to follow that shiny new thing every single time you start a project, or every time you meet a new client, or start something new. It needs to be revolutionary and completely different. But as we've learned, as we've got older and wiser, if it works, don't fix it.
Mm,
Copy and paste. There isn't a problem with that,
mm,
and they're learning from their mistakes and learning from their successes, and applying them. Like the key measures that they're saying at this stage is a dedicated task force. So that's going to streamline comms, flexible approval methods, which just fits absolutely perfectly with what they're trying to do, and what the industry's all about, if you think about it. So this is allowing projects to start or carry on while they look at the issues and the problems that need fixing. So they are safe and secure for their residents, which is correct for our industry, because at some point in the future, those things will have to be fixed, unless you might as well knock the building down.
yeah.
So to have that flexibility, is a massive positive. New guidance, obviously, as you expect, things need to change, and online tracking. So um, people that are applying and projects that have applied, they won't have to go through the slower written approval process, and it can be tracked online for speed and efficiency, which is all hugely positive. And like you said, rinse and repeat, but there isn't anything wrong with that. And we keep coming back to the BSR, and hopefully we will for a few more weeks, months, or even years, because they've given themselves a December deadline to get this down to 12 weeks, which seems a million miles away. But there's currently 299 live cladding remediation cases within this. So that's quite a backlog to
Mm,
fix, particularly when you think about why the BSR exist, and how it all came about. This is number one case for priority, and making sure that it's done correctly. So kudos to them for sticking to their guns, and a few more um, analogies, sticking their flag in the ground, etc., etc. Line in the sand. Anything else I can say of acronyms where they've set that objective and they'll probably achieve it? Good on
I,
them. Good on
well,
them.
the line you've used there, mate, they'll probably achieve it, is just, it's such a remarkable turnaround that we've probably mentioned it a couple of times, but I don't think we should let it pass without
Yeah,
referencing it again. I remember going to seminars a couple of years back where I'm not suggesting anyone, to your point, is obviously Grenfell and the Hackett report are the kind of key catalyst for this. So I'm not suggesting anyone said, we mustn't do anything, and this is all, nanny state and whatever else. I think people recognize something needed to happen, but I also think there was a lot of fear within sector, particularly on the SME contractor side of things, that how are we going to cope with such swathing legislation changes and delays to projects, and who's responsible for this, and lots of big arguments around funding and all of that sort of stuff. I can't believe the turnaround. I honestly cannot believe, and even Gateway 2 being held up as this like horrendous, it's choking the industry and it's too much red tape, and just from there to now is just hats off to all of them. It's incredible. I
refreshing.
think there was one other little thing that I wanted to flag, because I think it didn't get mentioned as much with the Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 things as well. Because to your point, I think the focus has been so much on clearing backlog and bringing down the number of cases that were currently in stream and all that sort of stuff. Let's not forget that there's going to be new projects joining, and a lot of this is about remediation. But going forward, one of the things that I thought worked really well with Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 was not just finding quick fixes to the stuff that was already there, but making sure that people were better educated, and therefore the standards of application for new works going forward were better. And I think the BSR had said that was one of the things that was helping them to get down the sort of average time for reviewing things, was that the standard of submissions was better and more accurate and more uniform, and therefore assessors were having a much easier time of checking things through. Same thing's going to happen here. There's new guidance and material that's being distributed to improve the standard of submission. So that isn't passing buck, back over to industry and away from the assessor. But I think there's a recognition that this is a two-way street, that we can make improvements on this side. We can recruit more people. We can do all of these things. We can standardize and streamline communications and provide more flexibility. But that we also need you to work with us, that if you can provide things in this manner and to this quality, we're going to stand a much better, we're going to have a much easier task rather of producing these things more quickly in the first place. And again, please God, if there is that big uptick in the second half of this year of new submissions going in, then it's just going to help us achieve our targets and get things moving a lot faster, isn't it? So just worth saying. But my God, in the space of 6 months, what a remarkable turnaround! There is some notes to be taken, I think, from not just various parts of our sector, but elsewhere. It's we're often looking for examples in other markets that with a bit of lateral thinking we can apply to construction and lessons learned. But I actually think we've maybe got one here that other sectors could be taking some lessons from and applying in their market, which is feels a nice position to be in, doesn't it? The moral high ground.
And
we
I don't want to
often
say
have it.
yeah, I don't want to say that we've had any form of impact on this at all, but it's just a weird coincidence that that we started the structure of the podcast round about the same time that all these changes started, and maybe they listened to one of the earlier episodes and took a long hard look in the mirror and a bit of self-reflection, took a walk around the garden with a cup of tea, and just thought, you know what, those two lads are right. We need to sort this out quick. That could have happened, in another reality.
So is this what happens where you can't talk about the weather or horticulture, and suppressing that then makes you go self-aggrandizing?
Yeah, yeah. If I don't get my horticultural fix from this podcast, then it's going to be a dark day in this household.
You need to steer us onto this third story quickly, mate, so we don't continue on this thread.
Yeah. If we had a producer, they'd be doing this quite. For anybody that's listening, I was doing a kind of move on sort of sign. But yes, indeed. Let's move on. Third and final headline from Construction Management this time, and this is by Nicola Hodkinson, who reports the value of apprenticeships for social mobility and regional growth is real. So what's holding businesses back? This is a really, really interesting piece and really eloquently written by Nicola. And when we think of apprenticeships, we think of people coming into the sector, learning a trade, and away they go. So why can't we just do that? Why can't we just, people are there and willing. We've covered it on previous episodes. I think the last episode we were saying there's about 1 million people that we could draw into the sector that currently haven't got a defined role in society. Talking about social mobility there. So why isn't this working? Why can't we deliver it at scale? Because it would solve a lot of problems that we keep saying the industry has. And Nicola points out a few elements here. Just to mention that Nicola, she's the owner of Seddon, and from Seddon's perspective, what she's saying is that they had 20 roles they wanted to fill last year, and they had 2,694 applications. So this is where she's saying that there's a willingness and a demand to come into the sector and learn a trade. We just can't seem to get that channel right and get apprentices into our industry. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I was going to say, firstly, I love that this is out there, because I've probably, without name checking, I probably mentioned a lot of Nicola's sort of thoughts and work on this podcast whenever this topic's come up. We've had a couple of very interesting conversations, she and I, off the back of the deconstruction stuff, and that was kind of where my thing has been, typical Marcus's view, I guess, that we need to improve the image of the sector by presenting it in a more kind of honest way, in my opinion, that we show more of the kinds of variety of roles that we've got, but also that we shoot for fame and just to be in people's sort of thoughts on a more frequent basis. And she agreed with elements of that. It wasn't like we were butting heads, but again, holding up stats like the one that you've mentioned there in terms of the number of applications that they've had for apprentices is that for certain types of role, the demand is absolutely there. And in a lot of cases, demand outstrips supply. And one of the things that Nicola's done a lot of work on over the years is looking at the employment model, basically, that for all of the positive things that, some of the flexibility of construction roles, being your own boss and self-employment and all those kinds of things. As a result of that, your ability to, dictate the type of work that you take on, to sort of set pricing and so on. That a lot of the apprenticeship models don't lend themselves to that. Particularly for the bigger contractors in supply chain. That without naming other organisations, I've heard stories of cases where people they've taken on apprentices on a 2-year apprenticeship because they wanted to use that as part of a tender or framework submission. They've won the work, that project's been completed, and then you've got this pool of apprentices with no new project to move on to. And again, these oftentimes they're young people. They maybe don't have access to transport. They're not earning enough where money is no object, and therefore they can move around and have that kind of flexibility and freedom offered. And we just lose a lot of people to the sector. We've spoken several times about the demand for construction courses in further education, and I agree with Nicola that demand and that talent pool seems to be there, but we have to provide a pipeline for them. And yeah, our current employment practices and the level of casual roles that exist within the sector, it's just not compatible with a young person that needs that stability of training, that stability of payment, all the social mobility points that Nicola mentions in the article. Those only come about through stable employment, through a steady paycheck, through knowing that work is secure. And yeah, if you're living project to project, those two things do not line up. So yeah, it's one of the big things that Nicola mentioned is that policies for apprenticeships are oftentimes developed around predictable employment models used in other sectors where people are PAYE, monthly or weekly paycheck, and those don't suit the needs of our sector. So yeah, construction needs its own focus from government. That, to your point, we have a big problem with youth unemployment. We have youth that want to join the sector, but either don't have the opportunity or are unable to. And we have the skills gap. We have the roles that theoretically we need to fill. So it should be a relatively straightforward job, one would think, to join the dots between those and find a route through. But it needs to be one that is construction centric rather than a more all encompassing approach to youth unemployment or to youth apprenticeships. And yeah, I don't know if you want to talk people through some of Nicola's recommendations on that front.
Yes. So the challenge is, like you've highlighted, is the fact that we do live in a project-based industry, or we do work in a project-based industry. There is that economic uncertainty, low margin, and high risk for the majority of the supply chain, and that has a trickle-down effect. So regardless of whether you're on site, you're labouring, you're learning a trade, or you are either side of that in the supply chain, the risk is still there. And then she highlights a policy misalignment. So the current framework, for apprenticeships, this is designed for other industries. It's designed for that singular place of work, traditional 9 to 5, clock in, clock out, and then you learn your trade within those hours, plus you're learning in a college or wherever. What she's proposing is government support, flexible delivery models, and pipeline visibility, which kind of covers all those challenges. So there's more support from the government, and rightly so. There seems to be a focus, and we've mentioned this in the past, but there's a focus with this current government on the built environment. So why wouldn't they want to get more involved in this? A flexible delivery model, uh, focusing on more project-based than your stable workplace environment and industries. And my thoughts go to, okay, so how would that be facilitated? And maybe there's some way around this by not focusing on employing apprentices for an individual organization. It's almost like a shared apprenticeship, like you would in a larger organization where you are kind of seconded onto various different disciplines to learn a trade and find out what you like. Something along those. And then pipeline visibility. So long-term procurement planning, really difficult. I get it, because there's, as we've mentioned on this episode, there's certain things that might impact in the wider world that have a huge impact within this industry. But on that respect, there are projects that are ring-fenced. There are more public projects that are going to go ahead. So maybe there's a potential to do something there as well.
Yeah, completely agree. I was just going to jump back to the previous point, Pete. That there was an event I was speaking at last year, and the topic of shared apprenticeships models came up as something that's been piloted, particularly in Greater Manchester. There's been a couple of really successful pilots, and seemingly an appetite again. I think organisations recognizing that yeah, we need people, but to your point, the nature of project-based work means that we can't guarantee them consistent employment. So, A, why would they want to look at us, and B, it causes problems for us. So, yeah, where there is that more grown up, I guess, collegiate sort of thought for, creating an apprenticeship pool between like-minded organisations, I think that seems like a really interesting model worthy of exploration, and whether that needs a sponsor at a devolved government level, for instance, that for any projects that they are going to fund, etc., that's where they're going to insist that partner organisations pull talent from. That could be one way of doing that, or at a local authority level. But I think, yeah, as long as you have kind of a sponsor organisation, as it were, that is holding the purse strings and can force members of their supply chain to do that, then I think that's worthy of exploration. I'd say the other thing that comes up, and again, the ONS data will tell you that we are 98% plus SMEs within the construction sector as identified by them, reviewing tax and national insurance relief for self-employment. I know highly, highly unpopular since it's been introduced, the increased rate of national insurance. It's just another barrier for businesses that are, you're absolutely right, in fairness, because we do cheerlead a lot. But for all of the good things that this government has done and the interest it's taken in construction, I think that's one policy that's been applied wholesale across the economy, but that is particularly hurtful to a sector that is so SME focused. Yeah, that's something that I'm not saying get rid of it necessarily, but yeah, it's something that needs serious consideration, because, again, given the volatility of supply chain and demand and sort of wider market forces on cost at the minute, you mentioned fuel and the impacts of oil across various other bits earlier. It's just another burden for businesses to carry, isn't it? So at a very practical level, that's maybe something that needs a look. But yeah, a lot to like in Nicola's piece, and a lot to like in the recommendations as well. So let's hope people more powerful than you and I are listening, as you insist they must be, based on their their changes to policy. Because yeah, I think there's some on the face of it, there's some straightforward things to implement there that I think could have a potentially seismic impact.
Yeah, I'm thinking we might need to change the name now to Policy Disrupted, because we're having that much influence in higher powers that maybe we need a change. It's not construction; it's the policies we're after.
Our subscription only spin-off show.
Late night.
Yeah. Late night policy chat. Right, get us out of here, Pete. What's your takeaway for the week?
Brilliant and much needed segue there, Ryan. Appreciate that.
I'm learning.
Yeah. My takeaway is, ironically, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Going back to the BSR and their rinse and repeat model, and looking to clear the backlog by December, and lo and behold, I've got no doubt that they'll get close to it, if not achieve that target, doing what they've done previously and has worked previously. So don't be fooled by the shiny new objects in the room. If something's working, keep it and make it work for you.
No, perfect. I was going to stick with BSR, but there's maybe something more broadly applicable. Certainly on the first story as well, is if something needs fixing, just stick with it. As I say, for the Building Safety Act particularly was was deeply unpopular with certain parts of the market when it was introduced, blamed for a lot of the slowness in sector and so on. And now, as I say, when we first looked at it, the BSR and the regulator was being hauled over the coals and in for questioning. And then within a space of quite a short period of time, here we are holding it up as one of the golden examples of positives within sector. So yeah, I would say, we've said it a few times, but people are going through some tough stuff at the minute. Just pick one bit, focus on that, and it will turn around with enough application.
Nice, like it. Well, let's see where they are in a week's time. They've probably halved the backlog this time next week. So yeah, let's look forward to that, and I'll see you next week.
Have a good week. Cheers, mate.